Okay, good morning, everyone. I hope you're well. It is not good morning. I'm sorry. Got to get used to a new time. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're well. It's Rabbi Akiva Males, and today is Wednesday. It is September 9th, and we're getting ready for a double Parsha this week, Parshas Netzavim-Vayelech. And I'd like to share some Divrei Torah with you, as well as an incredible incident of Hashgacha Pratis, some type of, really, it's too much to be chalked up as a coincidence. It happened to me while I was preparing for this. I'm just going to quickly get up because I want to get a certain sefer that I want to show you. I'll be right back. Okay, so let's start with the psukim that are on this source sheet. So this is in Parshas Netzavim, and we'll see that there's three psukim that we're going to focus on at the beginning. The psukim say as follows. It's in Perek Chavtes, it's chapter 29 in Sefer Devarim. The psukim say as follows: Ki atem yadatem es asher yashavnu beretz Mitzrayim. So Moshe says to Bnei Yisrael, you're all very aware and you know very well about what it was like when we lived in Egypt. And you also know how we passed through different nations along the way of our journeys over these last 40 years. Tazayin, Batiru Shikutzayin. And in the course of our journeys, whether it was while we lived in Mitzrayim or whether it was while we were wandering in these years in the wilderness and we came through other countries, Batiru Shikutzayim, we saw their abominations. We'll soon see how Rashi tells us what that means. That's Giluleim, and also their repugnant idols. Eitzvaven, they were made, some of them are made of wood, some of them are made of stone. Kesef is Zahav, some of their idols are made of silver, some of them are made of gold. Asheri Mahem. So Moshe is telling Bnei Yisrael, you've seen it. You've seen that the nations of the world have all sorts of disgusting idols that they worship, and they're very repugnant, and you've seen it. Yud Zayin, Isha, maybe amongst you there's a man or a woman, a mishpacha, shevet, maybe there's a family or an entire tribe, asher levavo foneh hayom, that whose heart is straying today from Hashem Elokeinu, from the Lord our God, l'leches lavod es Elokei hagoyim hahen, and is thinking about, maybe I'm going to try a new approach in life. I'll try to worship one of those false gods, one of those false idols. Maybe there is amongst you a root that produces hemlock and wormwood. So hemlock and wormwood are two types of herbs that grow that are poisonous. Wormwood might have some medicinal value if it's taken in the right quantities, the right mixtures, but it can be highly toxic if it's just ingested as is and in large enough quantities. So what Moshe is saying to them, again in these three psukim, are as follows, is that you know full well what it was like living in Mitzrayim amongst idolaters. During these last 40 years, we've passed through other nations and you've seen some of their idols. And it's all repugnant, it's all disgusting, but there might be some of you amongst this crowd who in their minds may be thinking about going down that road, about following and pursuing a path of idol worship. And he ends by saying his poetic way of saying, there might be some terrible weeds in this crowd, poisonous weeds, that if we don't cull them, they can end up causing great damage to a otherwise healthy front lawn or garden. That's how Moshe is saying this, is that perhaps in this crowd that's assembled before me, there are some who have decided to pursue a path of idol worship. And he goes on to say, do not do this, don't go that way, it won't end well for you or for those that you care about. That's the warning that Moshe issues in this parsha. Let's just see some Rashis on these psukim. So Rashi says the first one, Ki atem yadatem, for you know, vatiru shukotzeim, you Bnei Yisrael know what it was like living amongst Egyptians who worshipped idols. So he says as follows, Lefi sharisem umos ovdei avodah zarah, you have seen and you have witnessed up close that there are nations out there who worship idols. Maybe one of you was enticed to follow and to go down that road. Pen yesh bechem, perhaps there's some of you who may lefichach ani tzarich lashbechem. That's why I'm now bringing you to take this oath and to take this vow that nobody's going to go this way and that we're not going to stand for this if we should see anybody pursue this as a way of life. That's how Rashi's putting this in the context. Let's see the next Rashi. Vatiru shikutzeim, and you saw their abominations. What's that talking about? It's talking about their idols. Al shem shem meusim kishkatzim. Why are idols referred to as shikutzeim? Because they are disgusting, just like shkatzim. What are shkatzim? Creepy, crawly bugs, insects, centipedes, all that stuff we're not allowed to eat. Those are, the Torah refers to them as shkatzim. So therefore, that's why the idols are referred to as shikutzeim, because they're also abominable, just as abominable as those creepy, crawly creatures are. That's how the idols are viewed as well. One more Rashi, or two more Rashis. Giluleim. So what does it mean they're repugnant idols? So literally, galal means dung, manure. Shemusrachim umu'asin kigalal. Because they're idols. Why are idols called giluleim? Because they're putrid and disgusting, the same way dung is, the same way as manure is. That's why idols in this pasuk are referred to as giluleim, from the root galal, which means dung or manure. One more Rashi, shoresh porev rosh la'ana, a root that produces hemlock and wormwood. We said these are herbs that are poisonous. So he says, shoresh migdal esav markigi. Then this refers to a root that produces a bitter herb like gidin. Shehem marim, they're very bitter and they can be poisonous. Klamar mafre umarbe resha bekir bechem. Moshe was nervous that here what it means is that there's going to be someone who's producing and increases evil amongst you. But this would take off. So in other words, Moshe is confronting Bnei Yisrael right now and say, this is absolutely unacceptable. It's not an option to pursue Avodah Zarah. And let's just get this off of our list of options right now. That's what Moshe is doing. But again, in the Psukim, he's referring to Shikutzeim and Giluleim. The idols are referred to as their abominations and repugnant, like the same way that we recoil from all these disgusting little bugs. Just think about the last time one of those big 2-inch Memphis cockroaches are in your house. Nobody's happy about that. We recoil from that. And also dung, manure. When's the last time we weren't watching where we were walking and we stepped in something that one of our friendly neighbors left a deposit on the sidewalk there? We're disgusted. That's gross. Got to clean our shoes. It's absolutely disgusting. That's how these idols are referred to, and that was how Moshe and Bnei Yisrael see them at that point in history. Let's go a little further. So, page 2. I have here a brief bio as well as a Divrei Torah from Rav Yitzchak Zev Halevi Soloveitchik.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Can I ask a quick question? Where the Rashi says, therefore, I'm asking you to take this oath.
Yeah.
Is that oath binding on future generations, or just the oath, just the binding on the people that went into Eretz Yisrael?
Well, we're going to see there's different oaths, but there are definitely all the oaths that we took going into Israel. They were in last week's Parsha about how people are going to assemble on one side of the mountain and issue Amen when the Kohanim say, "Cursed be the one that does this." Those are binding on everybody. I think what these psukim are talking about specifically is that Moshe is bringing into Bnei Yisrael right now. He's having a conversation with them about idol worship, and he's saying that, I know it might be enticing because you saw it in Egypt. I know it might be enticing because you saw it during the 40 years we were wandering in the wildernesses, and you saw other nations involved in this. Right now, we're going to take an oath as a group to say this has no place in Jewish people. And I think that absolutely is incumbent upon us. The Torah is filled with...
So indicating that it's binding on all future generations then?
I believe so. I mean, and the Torah is filled with prohibitions of idol worship. I mean, he's constantly telling us about how this has no place in Judaism. So I want to share with you a Dvar Torah that I saw. There's a beautiful Dvar Torah from Rav Yitzchak Zev Halevi Soloveitchik. So the Soloveitchik family, obviously, it's a real dynasty. So this Rabbi Yitzchak Zev sometimes is referred to as the Grizz. Where does Grizz come from? So Grizz would be an acronym for Hagon Rabbi Yitzchak Zev, Grizz. So that's what you would see him sometimes referred to. He's also known sometimes as Revelvel, because in Yiddish, Zev is a wolf. And in Yiddish, how do you say, like in a loving way, a wolf? Is a velvel. A velvel is a wolf. So sometimes referred to as Revelvel Soloveitchik. So again, you see where he was born in late 1800s, died in the mid 1959, so the mid 20th centuries. And you see there he was an Orthodox rabbi, Rosh Yeshiva in Brisk, first in Europe and then in Jerusalem. He was a scion of the Soloveitchik rabbinical dynasty, commonly referred to as the Grizz. That was for the Gaon Rabbi Yitzchak Zev. Okay, I have here, and I'm holding this up. This is the book that this is found in. It says Chidushei HaGrizz and Beis Halevi. Beis Halevi, that was his grandfather, the original Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik ala Torah. So the first half of this sefer is, you see it's there. It's like a typewriter. It's called like a stencil, how that was written. That is the students of this Rav Yitzchak Zev Halevi Soloveitchik wrote over some of his Divrei Torah on the Parsha. When I was, this past Shabbos, I was looking up some items on Parshas Netzavim-Vayelech, and I saw what I'm about to share with you, I saw it quoted in a different sefer, and I always like to look things up in the original. So it hit me. I said, wow, this is a beautiful thought from Rav Soloveitchik. I think I have this sefer. I think I have the sefer with his Divrei Torah on the Parsha, and I'm going to look for it. And I went through all my Sfarim shelves, and sure enough, I found it. I did find it. I'm going to get back to that soon. But what you see there is a picture that's taken from the sefer. So let's see what he does with this. He quotes our Rashi's. It says Netzavim. He's in Parshas Netzavim. It says Vatiru shikutseim esguleim. So Moshe says to Bnei Yisrael that you saw their abominations and their repugnant things. So he's telling Bnei Yisrael, it sounds like we all refer to idols as shikutseim and gululeim because they're just as gross as creepy crawly insects, and they're just as repugnant as dung or manure. So he says, and still, pen yesh b'chem me'ish, maybe there's someone in amongst you who's thinking about pursuing a lifestyle like this. So Asher levavo paneh hayom me'im Hashem Elokeinu, and that's what it says. Perish Rashi, so I'm on the third line. Perish Rashi, Rashi explains, Atirena shikutseim, you saw their abominations. Al-Shem Ma'usim Kishkatzim. They're called that because they're just as gross as creepy crawly things. Iluleim, what does that mean? The idols are referred to as that. Shmusrachan Umuasim Kigalal. They're just as repugnant and just as offensive as manure or dung. Henyesh B'chem. And what does Moshe go on to say? Maybe there's one of you. Therefore, I've got to make this shavua because maybe they make this oath that we're all going to stay away from this because someone might be pulled in that direction. Listen to what Rav Soloveitchik does with this. He says, L'chaora, he says, at first glance, this makes no sense. Imheim ro osam mu'usim kishkatzim. If Bnei Yisrael are all on the same page as Moshe, and that's what he's saying to them, this is what we all refer to idols as. We all refer to idols as shikutseim and guleim. Why? Because we all think that they're just as gross and disgusting as creepy crawly roaches. Umusrachan masan kigalal, and they're as offensive and repugnant as manure. Hello, Adarabba. Then to the contrary, mi yifnalem. Who on earth, why would any member of Bnei Yisrael have the slightest desire to go down that road and to check them out? Why would they do that? Asher lachem, lama tzarech lashpiyah mishum zeh. Why does Moshe need to enter into an oath with anybody? If they're all on the same page and they all say these are gross, that these are the shkatzim, this is like creepy crawly things. These are gululim, these are like dung, manure, and we all call it that. That means everyone's repulsed by this. If that's the case, why does Moshe feel the need to say, okay, let's all make a shavua that nobody's going to experiment with this. Nobody's going to go having a life of avodah zarah. So Rav Soloveitchik says, Chazina mizeh, what do you see from this? She'im gam roim es avodas galulim, kishkatzim glulim. Even if someone sees idol worship as shkatzim and glulim, as repugnant as creepy crawling insects, and as offensive as manure, but nonetheless, they still saw it, and it's enticing. Moshe says you have to take the shavua. I know if I were to take a poll, are you grossed out? Yes, everyone say I'm grossed out. Are you disgusted? I'm disgusted. Is that on its own enough to keep you away from it? The answer is no. We need this shavua. We need to take another step. There's something so enticing. There was something so attractive. It's so hard for us to understand this about idol worship that even if everybody would say that's gross, even if everyone would say, ugh, that's nasty, nonetheless, once they've seen it, once they've encountered it, it seems like the heart was drawn to it. And Moshe says it's not enough just to say, oh boy, that was disgusting. Oh boy, that was gross. Now we need a shavua. Once it's been seen, there's some kind of like almost interest that's automatically built. And even though it's viewed as disgusting and repugnant, a shavua, an oath, is necessary. That's how infectious avodah zarah is. He says, Gam lirosa, even to see it, muasir, even if someone agrees that what I saw was disgusting. And he saw that it was absolutely gross. Even if someone sees it as gross and disgusting, there's something so powerful and so alluring about avodah zarah that someone could still be drawn to it. So Rav Soloveitchik is saying this is something that what you see from this conversation, the way Moshe is having this conversation with Bnei Israel and what Rashi comments on it, it gives us an insight into how the human heart and mind was so pulled after avodah zarah. Even if they were to acknowledge that it was gross or disgusting, just the fact that they saw it, all of a sudden the antennas go up and now they want a little bit more of it and they may go down that road even though they grant it's disgusting. That's what Rav Soloveitchik is saying, just to tell us about avodah zarah and the pull that it has on the human mind and heart. Now we may say, how can I possibly relate to that? So it hit me that this is very similar to something that many of our commentators point out on the Torah. Let's look at the Torah back in Parshas Naso, which is in Sefer Bamidbar. So when we read about the Nazir, so the Torah tells us as follows: Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, God says to Moshe, saying, speak to the Jews and say to them, Isha, whether it's a man or a woman, Kiafli lindor neder, Nazir lahazir laHashem. If they want to set themselves apart, so they take an oath to set themselves apart by becoming a Nazir, a Nazirite to Hashem. So Rashi quotes the famous saying of Chazal that says, what immediately preceded Nazir in the Torah? The whole incident of Sota, where you have this husband and wife who don't trust one another. The husband is suspicious of his wife that she's been unfaithful to him and that she's had an affair. And there's this whole ritual that's spoken about what can be done to prove her innocence and to hopefully save that marriage. But also, it could, if someone really was unfaithful, this could bring about a terrible punishment. So Sota immediately precedes Nazir. So look where Rashi quotes the famous saying of the sages. Kiafli, if someone takes an oath to separate and become a Nazir. Yafli is an expression that means to separate. Lama nismecha Nazir la parsha Sota. What's with the juxtaposition? Why does Nazir immediately follow Sota? Lamar lacha, to tell us, to teach us something. Shekola roa Sota bekulkula. Anybody who sees a Sota, an adulterous woman in her disgrace, going through this whole ritual, Yazir atzmo min hayayin, should immediately take the vow of a Nazir to abstain from wine, shumevili deniyuf, because wine, if someone's not careful with it, wine could break down barriers and could lead to all sorts of promiscuity and adultery. So what the sages are teaching us in this Gemara that Rashi's quoting is, why does Nazir immediately follow Sota in the Torah? To tell us, if anyone was in the Beis HaMikdash at the time that a Sota ritual was taking place, they should take the Nazir vow. Why? Because they saw the Sota b'kulkula, they saw the Sota in her disgrace, so now they should take the Nazir vow. Why? Because that would make certain that they don't ever end up in that same situation. So I remember one of my Rabbi in Yeshiva pointing out, saying on the surface, this Gemara that Rashi quotes makes no sense. What did this person see? The person didn't see the party. He didn't see this adulterous couple having a grand old time, whining and dining each other, and then being intimate. That's not what he saw. The Gemara said they saw Sota b'kilkula. They saw a Sota, they saw an adulterous woman in her shame going through the Sota ritual in the Beis HaMikdash. That's what he saw. Why does that guy need to take the vow of Nazirus? That guy saw the disgrace. He saw what the shame, what adultery could lead to. That's the last person that needs to take the Nazirite vow. We're not worried about him, I'd say. He sees just how terrible this is and what can happen with adultery. I wouldn't think this person needs to take the vow. Why does the Gemara say that's necessary? Must be that even if someone saw Sota b'kilkula, they saw her going through that shame, saw her going through that terrible experience in the Beis HaMikdash, which is the fact that they were exposed to it, even though it wasn't a pretty sight, just the fact that they were exposed to it our hearts were really drawn after promiscuity. That's part of the human condition. And just the fact that we were exposed to it, even in the most degrading point of the experience, which is what the person saw in the Beis HaMikdash, nonetheless, that immediately gets the gears in the head start turning and say, oh, there are people out there who are promiscuous. There are people out there who commit adultery. This person happened to have gotten caught. Well, this is a natural desire that everybody has. What might I be able to do that can make it that I won't get caught? Who would I plan something like this with? If I was going to have a tryst, who would it be with? And how might I get away with it? That's naturally what happens. The gears in the human mind start to turn when they're exposed to this. Even though they saw it in Bekilkula, they saw it in a moment of shame. They didn't see the party. They didn't see the whining and dining. They saw the shame. Nonetheless, because of the fact of the human condition is that this is something that the human heart and mind is naturally pulled after, that gets the gears in motion and starts thinking. So the Torah says that Chazal say, Nazir, now it's time to take a Nazir vow. Because you saw it, and now the gears are in motion, take the Nazir vow. That's what Rav Soloveitchik is saying about Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah operates the same way. There was this crazy passion that humanity had for Avodah Zarah. It's so hard for us to understand this now. The closest we might have is think about promiscuity. But there was a crazy passion for Avodah Zarah. So Rav Soloveitchik is saying, even though you admit it's Gululeim, it's Shikutzeim, it's disgusting, it's repugnant, it's manure, it's cockroaches, all that stuff. But you saw it. And once you saw it, the human mind is naturally pulled after it. And someone might start thinking about, well, how might I get away with this? What might I get out of this? Now, you got to take an oath. Very, very similar to what's going on by the Nazir and Sota is what you see about this oath after being exposed to Avodah Zarah. And what this is telling us is that just because someone may be disgusted by something, that's not enough of a point to rely on that will never get sucked into an Avera. If it really appeals to us, if it appeals to our base nature, just seeing it, even though it's at a disgusting point, and at that point we'll all admit it's disgusting, the gears begin to turn, and now something has to be done to create a stopgap, to make sure that we don't go down the wrong path. So we saw that by Nazir. That's what Chazal say about Nazir. After witnessing Sota B'Kulkula, someone has to take the Nazir vow. And that's what Rav Soloveitchik is saying. That's why this oath was necessary. Moshe was saying the oath was necessary by idol worship. I thought that was a very, very interesting idea. It explains these Rashis, and it explains this psukim, and it really links to this Nazir and Sota scenario. I want to come back to that, Rav Soloveitchik, in the Sefer specifically a little bit later. But let's look at another source. So here, this is a little bit later. This is in Perek Chavtes, chapter 29. And the pasuk says as follows: Hanistoros, those things which are hidden, La Hashem Elokeinu, that's God's business. Vaniglos, but that's what's revealed, Lanu Ulevanenu. I bolded Lanu Ulevanenu. You can see on top of it, there's all sorts of nikudos, and that appears in the Sefer Torah. There's all sorts of dots on top of the words Lanu Ulevanenu. But what's revealed belongs to ourselves and to our children, Ad Olam, forever, Lasos is called Divrei Torah Zos, to uphold and to fulfill all the words of the Torah. So let's see Rashi here. Rashi says, Hanistoros La Hashem Elokeinu. I'm just going to go up so everyone can see the Rashi. I got both in Hebrew and English. Hanistoros La Hashem Elokeinu. Vim Tomru. If someone would say, Ma biyadenu lasos, what are we supposed to do? Atamanish es harabim al hirhurei ayachid. The implications of this parsha is that God, you're going to hold the public responsible just because you got an individual who's thinking about sinning. Shenemar, because it said in Pasuk Yud Zayin, Pen yesh bechem ish. Maybe there's one of you. Maybe there's someone who was thinking about pursuing a life of idol worship. B'achar and it says in Chaf Aleph, Ra'u es makos haaretz ahi, that people will see how this land was stricken with all sorts of plagues. And so it seems like that we're going to be punished based on what yechidim, based on individuals' actions. We don't know what's going on in other people's minds. How can you hold us accountable for other people plotting to sin? So God is saying in this pasuk, have no fear. I will never punish any other member of Bnei Yisrael just because there's someone there who's thinking in his mind about the sins he or she wants to commit. What's going on in people's mind, what's hidden from the rest of humanity, that belongs to God. God will take care of that individual. That which is revealed, those actions that someone's actively taking, It's our responsibility and our kids' responsibility to root out that evil from our midst. If we see somebody is actively engaging in idol worship, we have to root that out. Vimlo, and if we don't, and if we don't bring them to judgment, then the masses will be held accountable and will be punished. Why? Because we should have restored order. We should have rooted that out from our midst. And then Rashi concludes by saying, and here's what I got bolded, Nakud al lanu uvanenu. There are nekudos, there are dots on top of the words lanu uvanenu. Lidrosh, to make the following drasha. Shiaf al haniglos, even on which was revealed, even on actions that someone's clearly doing wrong. Lo anash esarabim ad she'avru esayarden. Bnei Yisrael is not held accountable for what other members of Bnei Yisrael are doing wrong until we cross the Jordan and go into Israel. When they accept all the oaths on themselves at Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, and that's when we become each other's guarantors. When we become responsible for one another, that is when that responsibility kicks in, that we could be held accountable for the sins of another member of Bnei Yisrael. That's what he's emphasizing. So there's a story. There's a concept called arvus. Arvus means responsibility or guarantorship, that we are responsible for one another. And if we had the ability to, we see that there's sinning going on in our midst, and we had the ability to try to convince the other party to stop, and we just chose to do nothing, then we'll be held accountable for it. So why is it emphasized on the words lanu levanenu? Why are there those dots? To tell us and to teach this lesson that only kicks in, that heightened sense of responsibility only kicks in once we cross the Yarden, once we cross the Jordan. That's what Rashi says. Let's take a look at what the Chafetz Chaim does with this. So there's a beautiful idea from the Chafetz Chaim al Torah. So let's look what he says. Hanisteros Lashem Elokeinu, v'aniglos lanu v'anenu ad olam. That which is hidden belongs to God, and that which is revealed is our responsibility, both us and our kids, forever. Lasos is called Divrei Torah zos, to uphold all of the Torah. V'Rashi sham, Rashi there says, shenasu arevim zelazeh. Rashi says that when we crossed the Jordan and entered into Eretz Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael becomes one another's keeper. I am my brother and my sister's keeper. That's what we're told, what happens when we cross the Jordan. So now the Chafetz Chaim is going to give a beautiful mashal. By the way, based on the story of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh, that's what allows us to help another Jew fulfill their mitzvah. In other words, let's say I've already made Kiddush. What gives me the right to make Kiddush for another Jew? Because I'm responsible for the other Jew. So that allows me to do a mitzvah for them. So it says that's why I can help another Jew fulfill their obligation to do a mitzvah. Even though I've already done my mitzvah, Kiddush, U'Tekiyah Shofar, which is coming up. Same thing. Why does someone blowing shofar, what does that do to help me? He's helping me fulfill my mitzvah. That's the Rosh, it's fine. If my friend has not done a mitzvah, the converse of this is just like I can help my friend accomplish a mitzvah. If my friend's missing a mitzvah and I had the opportunity to help, it's like I'm missing the mitzvah. And therefore, there's also responsibility on every member of the Jewish people. We have a responsibility to try to impress on our friends, impress on other Jews, not to violate the Torah's injunctions. If I don't stop someone from sinning where I have the ability to do so, because we're responsible for one another, that means I will also be held accountable. Why? Because there was something I could have done. There was something I could have done to have stopped this, to correct the situation, and I didn't. I could be held accountable. I am my brother's keeper. That's what it means. Kol Yisrael arevim zelazeh. We're all responsible for one another. Now he goes, think about this for a minute. He's going to give a beautiful parable. Hello, Yadua. It's well known. Im Ruvain arav ba'ad Shimon. Let's say Reuven agreed to be a guarantor for Shimon, who was borrowing whatever sum of money. Let's say Shimon borrowed $1,000 from the bank. He needs a guarantor. So Reuven says, okay, I'll sign on as the guarantor. And now he sees that, okay, Shimon just borrowed all this money and he wants to make some investment with that money. But Reuven, who signed on as the guarantor, I recognize that that's a terrible investment. It's a mess. You're going to lose your shirt. Shimon's going to lose all his money. Now, what happens if Shimon loses all his money? Reuven, I signed on as the guarantor. So if I realize that I signed on as the guarantor and now Shimon's going to make a bad investment and lose all his money, how hard will Reuven try to get Shimon to rethink this and don't make that investment? Because he feels bad, Shimon's going to lose all his money, but then the bank's going to come after me. Because he realizes and recognizes full well, Reuven knows, since I signed on to be the guarantor, if Shimon makes a bad investment, makes a bad business choice, who's going to really take a hit? Yes, Shimon's going to take the hit, but then it's coming for me. The bank's going to come after me. The one who made the loan is going to come after me, after Reuven. So Reuven's going to do everything he can to stop Shimon from making that bad choice. That's exactly how it should work here. A person has to know. A person has to say, look, if I would be able to get my neighbors or the people of my locale to stop sinning based on how my power of persuasion or something I could do to make a good argument, but I say, you know what, I'm just too lazy. I don't want to get involved. I'm going to get snared in that. I'm going to get held accountable. Like what the sages say, if a person had the ability to protest about what his family's doing, and does not protest, will get swept up in the sins of that family. Meaning, if I could have stopped it and I chose to do nothing, I'll be held accountable. If I had the ability to stop my neighbors from sinning and I didn't, then I'll be held accountable for that as well. The Alkain, and therefore, as most of Satoros. Look what the Chavetz Chaim does with this. He says, once we know that there's this concept of arvus, we know that there's this concept of I am my brother's keeper, and I have to do whatever I can to make sure that my neighbors, my fellow Jews, make the right choices, and God forbid, don't make the wrong choices. So what's the best way to do this? Look what he does. We have to do everything we can to support Jewish education. These are institutions that are promoting our religion. So that kids who enter the portals of those Jewish institutions will learn the Torah, will learn how to fulfill the Torah. And they won't make the terrible life's decisions that are going to lead them down the path where they'll do so many things wrong that would create all sorts of terrible prohibitions. And so God doesn't visit his wrath on all of us, because in a sense we are responsible for everyone. What's the best thing that we can do? What is the best step we can take to ensure that Bnei Yisrael end up on a communal level, end up where we need to be, is to support Jewish education. Because if kids get that proper Jewish education, then we have the best bet that they'll be living a life of Torah and mitzvahs, and won't, God forbid, be living a life wherein they're violating Torah and mitzvahs. We should all be looking for ways. What can we do to reduce the sins of Israel? So what he said in that paragraph there, you notice he didn't necessarily say children. He just said religious institutions. That we have to think, what can we do to strengthen religious institutions? Because if we strengthen religious institutions, that's the best way to see to it that the Jews in our locale will be living lives of Torah and mitzvahs, and won't, God forbid, be going against Torah and mitzvahs. Look at the footnote, though. Now he says, but why does the Torah put the dots, the emphasis on lanu ulevanenu, on our children? Nakud alavanenu. Why does it put all those dots on our children? It's like if someone was writing a letter to their friend, and he wants to really emphasize something. What does he do? He puts a nikud, he'll put dots over or under the letters. He'll write it all in caps. He'll underline it. He'll bold it. And that'll show just how important this matter is. So too, when we're talking about strengthening Jewish religious institutions, the most important of our Jewish institutions are the ones that are providing a chinuch, are providing education to our children. And it's through by taking care of the youngins, by taking care of those who are young and those who are little and setting them off on the right path. That's how we bring strength to our religion. That's how we ensure our future. So what the Chavetz Chaim is saying is, first of all, a beautiful mashal. He's saying is there's this concept of arvus. There's this concept of that we are all guarantors for one another. And he says, think about this. Let's say it was monetary. What would we do if I signed on as a guarantee to a loan and I see my friend who took that loan is making a terrible business mistake? I'm not going to just sit back and say, hey, listen, live and let live. Person's going to make mistakes and they're going to have to live with the consequences. I'm not going to say that because I'm going to have to deal with the consequences. I was a guarantor. The bank's going to come after me. So the Chavetz Chaim is saying the same thing here. Now that we know that when crossing the Jordan, Bnei Yisrael are all arevim. We're all guarantors for one another. And that's great that we can all make kiddush for one another. But along with being a guarantor means that if I had the ability to put my friend on the straight and narrow and I chose not to, then I'm going to be held accountable for what that person's done wrong. So I'm that guarantor. So the same way that in a case of a loan, if I've signed on as a guarantor for a loan, I'm going to do everything I can to give the guy good practical business advice because I don't want the bank coming after me. So too, when I'm dealing with my fellow Jews, I have to find a way, obviously, to do it in a manner that I'll be receptive. I'm not just going to start smacking them upside the head and tell them all this criticism. I've got to find a way to be effective, find a way to be persuasive, and try to lead people down the right path. But I'm not going to sit idly by and say, okay, it's their life, it's their problem, they got to worry about it. I'm not going to do that. The same way I'm their guarantor. Same way I wouldn't do that by a loan, I'm not going to do that about Torah and mitzvahs. And then the Chavetz Chaim says, at the end of that piece, he says, what's the strongest way to ensure that Jews are on the straight and narrow? Are religious institutions. It can be shuls, yeshivas, whatnot. But in the footnotes on the bottom, he says the most important part of this is what we do for the children. And what we do for the children is going to have the greatest impact on the future of Bnei Yisrael. And that's why Ulevanenu has the dots on top. It's as if Hashem was taking out his highlighter, bolding this and saying, you want to know the best way to ensure the Jewish future, Jewish continuity? Levanenu. Make sure to take care of those children and set them up straight with the Torah education. That's what the Chavetz Chaim seems to be saying there. And what he is saying and what he's very strong about. I want to come back. I had mentioned to you earlier that there was something that made an incredible impression upon me with this Sefer, with Rav Soloveitchik's Chidushim on the Torah. And here's what I want to share with you. And this ties in beautifully what the Chavetz Chaim just said. On Shabbos, I told you that I was looking up. I wanted to find this Sefer. I said, I know I have it in the house. And I found it. And it was a beautiful Dvar Torah. But you know what was even more beautiful than the Dvar Torah? The inscription I found in the cover. When I opened the Sefer, and here I have a picture of it. I'll read it with you. I opened the Sefer, and I found this beautiful inscription in the cover. And I realized what had gone on. I had gotten this Mishnah, this Sefer as a prize from my 5th grade Rabbi, Rabbi Kalman Fishman. I had gotten it in the Hebrew Academy at Cleveland. He had given me this as a prize, as a 10-year-old. There was no way I could understand this Sefer as a 10-year-old, and there was no way I could understand his inscription as a 10-year-old. But here it is. It was 36 years later. This is crazy. I translated his inscription. Beautiful Hebrew he wrote there. You see it? Here I translated it. Here's his approximate translation of Rabbi Fishman's inscription. This prize is given to my dear and valued student, Akiva, Moshe, Chaim, Males, in recognition of your incredible accomplishments in learning Mishnayos and remembering them by heart during the year 5744, which was 1984-85. By the way, so what did Rabbi Fishman do? He was such an energetic Rebbe. He had so much life to him. He was just such a vibrant person. Somehow or another, he was able to get kids to volunteer to stay after school for like an extra Mishnayos club. That, you know, even though we had a dual curriculum, we learned Limudei Kodesh, Limudei Chol, our Jewish subjects, our general studies. We learned everything. And then at the end of the day, he had like an extra Mishnah club that he got us to stay. I don't know how he pulled this off, but I had stayed for his extra Mishnah club. And at the end of the year, he was giving this prize because I guess apparently there was something to repeat a number of the Mishnayos back by heart. Mishnayos Balped, they would always call that. And he gave me this Sefer as a prize. May it be his will that you should always desire to learn our holy Torah with persistence and great diligence and keep growing in Torah. You're of heaven, good character traits and good conduct. May your precious parents be filled with nachas from you. May you bring a good name and much pride to your family and your people. May you continue the legacy of your ancestors. These are my wishes from the depths of my heart. Your teacher who takes pride in you, Clonimus Kalman Hakohen Fishman. And I put this down on Shabbos, and I was almost in tears. I said to Layla, I just felt like I got a really warm hug from my 5th grade Rebbe. I loved Rabbi Fishman. I had him both in 2nd grade and 5th grade. He taught both grades. The way they did it at that point was that they would have general studies at 2nd grade in the morning, and then Limudei Kodesh, the Jewish studies, in the afternoon. Specifically this way, so Rabbi Fishman could teach both 2nd and 5th grades. That was the way they had staggered that. So I had him both in 2nd grade and 5th grade, and I loved Rabbi Fishman. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at this bracha, and he would always tell us that he was a Kohen, and his brachas have special power because he was a Kohen, so we should listen to his brachas and we should accept them. And I felt like I was getting a hug, and I told Layla, I said, I was feeling so stressed out this past Shabbos. We're all feeling stressed out now with all this coronavirus and all the pressure it's putting on everyone. And I just felt like it was such a warm embrace. I had opened the Sefer, I found this Divrei Torah, and I got a warm embrace from Rabbi Fishman. So I just told her I felt great about it. So Layla tells me, where's Rabbi Fishman now? I said, I don't know. I think the last I spoke to him must have been about 15 years ago. I remember I called him. It was about 15 years ago. I haven't spoken to him in the longest time. She says, you should ask your parents after Shabbos, how do you contact Rabbi Fishman? You should tell him this because this would probably mean so much to him. So I did that. Motzei Shabbos, I called my parents this past Motzei Shabbos, right after Shabbos ended, and I told my parents about this incredible experience, what had happened. I found this Divrei Torah. It's great for the Parsha class, but even better than Divrei Torah was that inscription and how that meant so much to me. It gave me it felt like I was getting a warm hug from Rabbi Fishman. And my parents told me, my father says, Akiva, I'm so sorry to tell you, Rabbi Fishman passed away on Thursday, this past Thursday. His family is currently sitting Shiva. And I was just absolutely in shock. I said, I can't believe this. It's like, I feel like, what's the odds of this? That on Shabbos, he just passed away Thursday. And on Shabbos, I stumbled on this. And then I just had all these warm feelings and memories of Rabbi Fishman coming back. He was such a Leibniz person. He had so much life. Also, besides for staying extra after school to learn Mishnayos, he had the kids. Our parents would drive us to his house before Sukkot to help him build and decorate his sukkah. Again, imagine what's going on. That he's got kids from the school begging their parents, "Let me go so I can help build a sukkah." I mean, he was such an exciting personality. But he had just passed away, and he had lost his wife several years earlier, and he had just passed away, and that was that. I looked online and I found, here's something that they had sent out the Cleveland Jewish community. Was Baruch Dayan Emes. This was September 3rd, from Thursday of last week. We regret to inform you the passing of Rabbi Kalman Fishman. Here's his daughter, Mrs. Libby Manis, as she lives in Cleveland. Will be sitting Shiva in Lakewood with her sister for the first couple of days, and then she'll come back to sit in Cleveland. My parents just went to visit in Cleveland. They did an outside Shiva in the yard, and with social distancing and masks and all that. And then she's got a daughter, Mrs. Esther Nathan, lives in Yerushalayim. So I called her. I told her about this. Here's a picture also. My brother Josh. My brother Josh is 10 years older than me. So in 1975, I was in Rabbi Fishman's 5th grade class in 1985. So Josh was in his class in 1975. Josh had this picture in his photo album in Yerushalayim, in Israel. He sent it to me from Israel. A scan of this is that they had the brachas bee in 1975. Torah Masorah was running these brachas bees. They were encouraging schools around the country to have a brachas bee. And of the whole Hebrew Academy that was competing in the brachas bee, my brother Josh won. So he won a trip to New York with Rabbi Fishman. They flew to New York, where he competed at the national level at the brachas bee. To this day, my brother, he's got a great memory, Josh. He still remembers exactly what he got wrong. It was pearled barley. He said for some reason, the brachos bee guidebooks that the Hebrew Academy had did not have pearled barley in it. So as a 5th grader, he had no idea what pearled barley was. So he took a guess of shahakol, and it was wrong. It was a mizonos. He still remembers. He still grumbles about this, like it was fixed. They didn't give us the right handbook for that brachos B. I had a chance. I could have done it. It's all these years later, 45 years later, he's still grumbling about that. But there's Rabbi Fishman together with him. And what ended up happening was Matzei Shabbos with WhatsApp and emails. My siblings and I have 3 older brothers. We had all had Rabbi Fishman as a Rebbe, and we all loved him. We had such fond memories of him and how exciting he made things. And we just were shooting these emails and WhatsApps back and forth, sharing memories. And it got me on Sunday. I found some time. I put an article together. I think it should have been published today. If I'll share it with you as soon as I get a PDF. I spoke to the daughter in Israel. She really appreciated hearing a lot of this and getting a lot of these memories. My brother Josh made a shiva visit in Israel. Again, it was outdoors, the whole business, but this was this. But I just couldn't get over the hashgacha pratis. Is that of all the weeks that I should stumble upon this sefer, all the weeks that I should stumble upon the sefer to have a nice little Divrei Torah Netzavim, which was at the beginning from Rav Soloveitchik, all of a sudden I should open this up and see this inscription, and this should make such an impact on me. And how this ties with what the Chafetz Chaim was saying about Levanenu, is that if we want to ensure Jewish continuity, and how do we make sure to be the guarantors for one another, we got to do everything we can to make sure that the kids are receiving the proper Jewish education. And now it brought me to this beautiful inscription by a marvelous Jewish educator. He taught for 53 years at the Hebrew Academy of Cleveland. So there's generations and generations of boys who went to the Hebrew Academy of Cleveland who had Rabbi Fishman as their Rebbe. And here's someone who really invested in children and understood that was the future of the Jewish people. And I just felt such a warm hug from him this past Shabbos. And when did this all happen? When he passed away on Thursday, and the family's in the middle of Shiva. I hope this could be some kind of an aliyah, studying from the Sefer that he gifted me with in 1985. Could be an aliyah for his neshama, and just repeating his name and talking about him so much and the value that he put on Jewish education, fulfilling what the Chafetz Chaim wrote. This should be an aliyah for his neshama. And I'm happy to share this with you. So again, in terms of just summing this all up, the lessons we saw from today begins with what Rav Soloveitchik was saying on the Parsha. By the way, that Rav Soloveitchik, that's an uncle of the famous Rav Soloveitchik that was in America at Yeshiva University and in Boston. Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik was a nephew of this Grizz, of Rav Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik. So that first idea of the fact that if we're calling it already disgusting and it's repugnant, then why do we need to take a shavua, take an oath that we're going to stay away from it? Because that's the way the human heart is. We were so drawn after idol worship, even though we said it's disgusting, but if we saw it, we experienced it, automatically the senses go up and we're drawn to it. So now we need to take an oath to counteract that. Same too, we saw this concept by Nazir and Sota, that the Gemara says that someone who witnessed the Sota ritual needs to take the vow of Nazirus to make sure that he or she never goes down that path. What do you mean? This person didn't see the party. They saw the person getting shamed for this. That person you'd think is going to stay the furthest distance possible away from this. The answer is no, because since promiscuity is something which naturally draws, it's just the way human beings are hardwired. We're drawn in that direction. As soon as someone sees it's a possibility, okay, this person may have gotten caught. They may have been ashamed, but maybe I could pull this off and I'll get away with it. So we have to do something to counteract that right away. That's Nazir. That was what he said there. And then we said that idea about on Rashi and the Chafetz Chaim is that if we're guarantors, we are guarantors for all for each other. He gives that beautiful mashal. The same way if I was a guarantor on a loan, I'd do everything I could to make certain that person didn't make a terrible business investment. So too, now that we know we're all guarantors with one another in terms of Torah and mitzvahs, if we have someone in our lives who we're able to communicate with, and we say, I'm going to just sit back and let that person make his or her own choices, that's terrible. I would never do that if I was a guarantor on that person's loan. I shouldn't do that when I'm watching that person make terrible decisions and terrible choices in regards to Torah and mitzvahs. The Chafetz Chaim ended by saying that there's no place where no greater investment we could make in terms of trying to get our fellow Jews on the right path than investing in Jewish education. And I thought this was only fitting to say an ode to a marvelous Jewish educator, Rabbi Kalman Fishman. Olav Shalom, may rest in peace, and for all the generations of Jewish children that he educated at the Hebrew Academy of Cleveland. I'm gonna end it here, and